Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. Today's Do You Know question is, do you know the significance of the 5 major discourses in Matthew's Gospel? During lectionary year A, we focus on Matthew's Gospel, especially during ordinary time. And in order to understand the way Matthew is set up, it's important to look at the structure. Matthew is a very structured gospel. But in order to, before we get to the structure, it's important to kind of recall the difficulties that Matthew's community is facing. Matthew's community is primarily a Jewish community that is facing a number of crises. In the year 70, the Romans came down and destroyed the temple and the city of Jerusalem, which left many of the Jews there wondering, how can we still be faithful Jews without a temple? And the Pharisaic movement came and gave direction to the Jews with regards to their future direction. The second issue that Matthew's community was facing was the fact that they were following Jesus and believed Jesus to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, but some of their fellow Jews refused to believe and accept that, and so they were in tension with those fellow Jews. And the third issue that they were facing is that a number of Gentiles wanted to follow Jesus and be disciples of Jesus and wanted to be members of the community. And they weren't sure how the Gentiles and Jewish communities were mixed together. So they were facing a number of difficulties. Matthew himself and Matthew's community, therefore, composes a gospel in which Matthew portrays Jesus essentially as a rabbi, a teacher, giving directions, guidelines, and ethical suggestions to people of how to be faithful and live in according to God's way in times of difficulties. For a long time, many scholars have acknowledged that Matthew structured his gospel along 5 units, or 5 major units of discourse. These are units that all end, and it's very clear in the structure, they all end with the phrase, when Jesus had finished these words. And so we know that it's clearly the end of these units of discourse. And what I'd like to do is just briefly orient you to the 5 major discourses. Many scholars suggest that most likely Matthew is picturing Jesus as the new Moses who gives the new law, if you want, based on pretty much the 5 books of the Torah. In his case, he proposes 5 major discourses in his gospel to imitate the 5 books of the Torah. And so the first of these 5 discourses is located in chapters 5 through 7 in Matthew's Gospel, and this is the well-known and most beloved Sermon on the Mount. And that sermon is one of the most famous passages in that whole sermon, speaks of love of enemies, doing good to those who hate you, being persons of forgiveness, being person of reaching out to others, being person of treating others the way God has treated us. And so it's a very famous ethical directions of how the communities and the disciples of Jesus are to live. The second discourse is chapter 10, and this is known as the missionary discourse because this is the discourse in which Jesus sends out his disciples, his followers, out to spread the word, and as they do so, they're to spread the word with humility, with proclaiming it boldly, and even realizing that they might be rejected and even persecuted for their spreading the word. Chapter 13 is the third major discourse, and this is a series of parables. Chapter 13 is actually the center of the gospel. It's a series of 7 parables which speak about what the qualities of the kingdom of heaven, what the kingdom of heaven is all about. Chapter 18, the fourth of these discourses, is a discourse on community living. Jesus gives guidelines and directions about how to live as members of the kingdom of heaven on earth. And it talks about humility again, it talks about correcting one another, and it speaks about consistent forgiveness, unlimited forgiveness of one another, 70 times 7 forgiveness of one another. And then finally, chapters 23 to 25 speak about the end times. These are where Jesus warns people to be faithful to the directives that he's giving, but always be prepared, for you do not know when the Lord comes. And that the section ends with chapter 25 of Matthew's Gospel, the famous Last Judgment scene, in which Jesus separates, as Lord of the nations, separates the sheep, the nations, the way a shepherd would separate sheep from goats, and judges us based on how we have cared for the least of our brothers and sisters. And so this brings to a closure the 5 major discourses in Matthew's Gospel. And remember, what Matthew was doing is offering hope and courage to people who are struggling with their fidelity to committing and following through on the mission and ministry of Jesus. And so these, as we go through ordinary time in any of our liturgical cycle, year A, as we go through these, let us pay attention to the hope and the courage that these discourses offer us as we try to live out the mission and ministry of Jesus, even in the midst of difficulties and persecutions. So I hope this has helped just a bit to explain the significance of the 5 major discourses in the Gospel of Matthew. And I hope that as you go through ordinary time, that you will focus on these discourses and take the lessons for them for your own discipleship. So I hope you will return again to more detailed questions to learn more about our scriptures and how they can help us be better disciples. Thank you very much.